Today, we're going to unravel an incredible story of power, faith, and revolution. We're talking about the empire of the church.
And it all really boils down to this one huge question. How did the collapse of the single greatest empire the world had ever seen somehow lead to the rise of not one, not two, but three major world religions? It's an amazing chain reaction that literally reshaped our world.
All right, so our story kicks off with the Roman Republic. It's in the middle of a serious crisis. They'd conquered pretty much the entire known world, but they just could not get a handle on their own internal problems.
So what was the core issue here? Well, Rome was an oligarchy. That's just a fancy word for ruled by the few. In Rome's case, it was about 100 powerful families, the patricians, who held all the cards. Now, when Rome was a small, scrappy little city-state, this actually worked. It made them cohesive and strong. But for a sprawling empire, it was a recipe for disaster.
And why was it such a disaster? Because those families just would not give up their power. Think about it. Instead of building a stable, professional bureaucracy to actually run this massive empire, they basically just carved it up into their own personal playgrounds. And this led directly to rampant corruption, stagnation, and a century of just brutal, non-stop civil wars. The whole system was completely broken.
So the solution that finally came along was, well, it was radical. The Emperor Constantine basically decided that if he couldn't fix the political system, he was going to have to change the entire identity of the Roman people themselves. He did two huge things. First, he packed up and moved the capital from Rome to a brand new city, Constantinople, which laid the foundation for what would become the Byzantine Empire. And second, he made Christianity the official state religion. He was trying to create a new unifying ideology for everyone.
And this is the result. The empire splits into two totally different worlds. You've got the East, Byzantium, which was wealthy, stable, and super organized. It lasted for another 1,000 years. But the West was the total opposite. It was poor, chaotic, and it just shattered into this patchwork of warring territories.
And whenever there's a power vacuum, something new rushes in to fill it. And into the chaos left by the fallen Western Roman Empire, a completely new kind of power started to grow. One that wasn't based on land or armies, but on faith.
The Catholic Church basically became the new empire of the West, and its claim to power was pretty unique. The church said, look, kings and warlords can fight over dirt and rocks, but we decide who gets into heaven. They ruled over salvation itself, and that's a power that no earthly kingdom could ever match.
Now, to keep all its followers on the same page, the church needed a single, official set of beliefs. And at the very heart of this was the concept of the Holy Trinity. So, the doctrine states that God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit are three totally separate beings, but they're also completely equal, and at the same time, they're all the exact same thing.
Which brings us to a really interesting question posed by our source material. Why would you create an official doctrine that, by its very design, is a logical paradox? It makes absolutely no sense, right?
The source we're looking at here offers a pretty provocative theory. The point, it argues, was never for you to understand the doctrine with your brain. The point was for you to accept it on pure faith. According to this view, by making the core beliefs something that defied all logic, the church created a system where you couldn't argue. You couldn't reason your way through it. You just had to accept it. It was a tool to encourage submission.
But this iron-fisted enforcement of orthodoxy had a huge, completely unintended consequence. By violently cracking down on anyone who disagreed, the empire accidentally set the stage for a whole new religious movement to rise up. So let's trace exactly how this happened. It's like dominoes falling. First, the Byzantine Empire gets really aggressive about enforcing the Trinity. This leads to the persecution of anyone who doesn't toe the line, like Jewish communities and some Christian groups, the Nestorians, for example, who had different ideas about Jesus. So these persecuted groups flee to the safest place they can find, the Arabian Peninsula, which was this really vibrant crossroads of trade and ideas. And there, all these different beliefs start to mix and mingle, creating this perfect environment for a new religious movement to be born.
And right into this mix steps a charismatic leader named Muhammad. And he comes with a powerful, incredibly simple message that was the complete opposite of what the old empires were selling. He promised religious tolerance. He told people, Christians, Jews, Arabs, that the divine spark was inside them and they should be free to worship however they saw fit.
After centuries of being told what to believe, you can imagine how liberating this message was. It was exactly what people were desperate to hear. United by this new vision, Muhammad's followers just exploded across the Middle East, conquering huge territories from the exhausted and, frankly, deeply unpopular Byzantine and Persian empires.
Okay, so let's jump back to Western Europe for a minute. The Catholic Church is now at the absolute peak of its power. It seems untouchable. But right when it looks strongest, these deep cracks start to appear in its foundations.
A real legitimacy crisis was starting to brew. I mean, look at the science. The Crusades? They ultimately failed to hold the Holy Land. Dissent was growing at home, which led the Church to create the terrifying Inquisition to hunt down heretics. On top of that, corruption was everywhere. You could literally buy your way into heaven by purchasing indulgences. And then, the whole empire of faith fractures when the Eastern Church officially breaks away. The idea of one unified Christendom was falling apart.
And then, disaster struck. Not just once, but like a 1, 2, 3 punch. First, a sudden climate shift triggers massive crop failures and a devastating famine. And just as Europe is trying to recover from that, the Black Death shows up.
And the plague wasn't just a disaster. It was an unimaginable catastrophe. It killed up to a third of the entire population of Europe. Society was brought to its absolute knees. And this unbelievable horror led to a terrifying question that started to echo all across the continent. People began to ask, wait a minute, if the Church speaks for God, if the Pope is God's representative on earth, then why is God punishing us like this? Why is this happening?
Suddenly, the Church's promises of divine protection looked completely hollow. Its legitimacy was shattered. People's faith in the institution was broken, and the stage was perfectly set for the next great religious revolution.
And that revolution, of course, has a name: Protestantism. But, well, that's a story for our next explainer.